The axe came down with a crack that echoed through the Montana wilderness, and Jacob Tanner felt the shock of impact run through his shoulders as another log split clean in two. February 1882 had brought the kind of cold that turned a man's breath to ice crystals before it left his lips, the kind that made every swing of the axe feel like his muscles were tearing, but he kept going, because winter in the Rockies did not care about a man's comfort. He had been at it since dawn, his cabin's woodpile dangerously low after 3 weeks of relentless snowstorms that had buried his homestead under drifts taller than a horse. Sweat froze on his brow despite the exertion, and his hands, calloused and scarred from years of surviving alone in these mountains, gripped the axe handle with the kind of determination that had kept him alive through 6 brutal winters. Jacob was 28 years old, built like the mountains themselves, all broad shoulders and thick muscle, earned from hauling timber and wrestling stubborn mules through narrow passes. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, usually tied back with a leather cord, but today it hung loose around his face, damp with sweat despite the frigid air. His beard, thick and untrimmed, covered a strong jaw, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds, perpetually watchful. He stood 6 feet and 3 inches tall, and every inch of him spoke of a man who had learned to survive through strength and solitude. He preferred it that way. People were complicated, unpredictable, and more trouble than they were worth. The mountains were honest. They would kill you if you were careless, but they never lied about their intentions. He set another log on the chopping block, raised the axe high, and brought it down with practiced precision. The wood yielded with a satisfying crack. He had another cord to split before nightfall, and the sky already showed signs of dimming, that peculiar pale quality that came before sunset in winter. His breath came in steady plumes, his body finding its rhythm despite the cold that tried to seep into his bones. This was his life now, and had been for the past 6 years since he left civilization behind after the war, after watching too many good men die for causes that seemed increasingly meaningless. Out here, the only cause that mattered was survival, and he was good at that. He was setting up another log when he heard it, the crunch of snow under boots, a careful, measured approach. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle, leaning against the woodpile, his body tensing. Visitors were rare this deep in the mountains, and rarely did they bring good news. Traders came in autumn, trappers sometimes stopped by in late winter. But in February, with the passes still choked with snow, no one should be out here. "Please, Don, not shoot," a woman's voice called out, clear and steady despite an obvious tremor of cold. "I mean no harm. I was hoping to trade for some help." Jacob turned slowly, axe still in hand, and stopped mid-breath. A woman stood at the edge of his clearing, bundled in a heavy coat that had seen better days, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. But what caught his attention was her face, visible beneath the hood, delicate features flushed with cold, lips slightly blue, and eyes the color of honey catching the weak afternoon light. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, and she looked half frozen. Behind her he could make out the shape of a horse, heavily laden with supplies. "You are a long way from anywhere," he said, his voice rough from disuse. He had not spoken to another human being in over 2 months. "Nearest town is 15 miles through snow that will kill you before sunset." "I know," she said, taking a cautious step forward. "I came from there this morning. I am Sarah Brennan. I have a homestead about 3 miles east of here, near Copper Creek. I arrived 2 weeks ago with my brother, but she paused, her voice catching. "He died 4 days ago. Pneumonia. I buried him myself." Jacob felt something twist in his chest, an unwelcome surge of sympathy. He forced it down. Sympathy was dangerous. Caring was dangerous. "I am sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it despite himself. "But if you are looking for help getting back to town, you picked the wrong man. I do not leave my mountain." "I am not asking you to," she said quickly. "I am asking for something else. I need to learn how to survive out here, at least until spring when I can make it back to town safely. I need to know how to keep a fire going all night, how to split wood properly, how to hunt small game. I have some money and I can cook. I brought coffee, real coffee, not the chicory substitute. I thought perhaps we could trade, your knowledge for supplies and hot meals." Jacob stared at her for a long moment, Every instinct he had developed over 6 years of isolation screamed at him to refuse, to send her away, to maintain the careful distance he had built between himself and the rest of humanity. But something about the way she stood there, trembling with cold but refusing to show weakness, her chin lifted with determination, made him hesitate. "Coffee," he said finally. "Real coffee?" "A full pound," she confirmed. "Brazilian, shipped through San Francisco. My brother bought it in Helena before we came out here. He loved his coffee." Her voice wavered on the last word, grief raw and fresh. Jacob looked at the sky, calculating. Another hour of daylight, maybe less. She would never make it back to her homestead before dark, and traveling these mountains at night in February was suicide. He looked back at her, taking in the way she held herself, the exhaustion in her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. "Your horse needs rest," he said gruffly, "and you look like you have not slept in days. You can stay in my barn tonight, leave at first light. I will show you some basic survival skills in exchange for the coffee, but then you are on your own. I do not take charity cases, and I do not do long-term arrangements." Relief flooded her face, and she nodded quickly. "Thank you. I promise I will not be any trouble." Jacob grunted and gestured toward the barn, a sturdy structure he had built his first year in the mountains. "Get your horse settled. There is hay in the loft and a stall in the back. I will finish up here, and then we will talk." She led her horse toward the barn, moving carefully through the deep snow. Jacob watched her go, then turned back to his woodpile with more force than necessary. What was he thinking, agreeing to this? He had spent 6 years avoiding exactly this kind of complication. But the thought of that coffee, real coffee, rich and dark and nothing like the bitter substitutes he had been choking down for months, had weakened his resolve. That, and something about her eyes, the way they held both grief and determination in equal measure. He split wood with renewed vigor, trying to burn off the uncomfortable feeling that his carefully ordered world was about to become much more complicated. By the time he had finished and stacked the last of the split logs, the sun was touching the peaks of the western mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. He gathered his tools and headed for the cabin, stopping by the barn to check on his unexpected guest. She had indeed settled her horse properly, removing the saddle and bridle, rubbing the animal down with a reasonably practiced hand. The horse, a sturdy bay mare, munched contentedly on hay. Sarah herself was arranging her supplies in a corner of the barn, creating a neat little camp. "You know horses," Jacob observed from the doorway. She looked up, pushing a strand of dark brown hair back from her face. "My father was a farrier in Philadelphia. I grew up around horses. After he died, my brother and I decided to try for a fresh start out west. We heard there was good land available in Montana for homesteading." She smiled sadly. "Thomas was always the dreamer. He convinced me it would be an adventure." "It is an adventure," Jacob said, "the kind that kills people." "I'm beginning to understand that." She stood, brushing hay from her skirt. "But I made a promise to my brother before he died. He made me swear I would not give up on the homestead, that I would at least try to make it through to spring. He spent everything we had getting us out here. I owe it to him to try." Jacob wanted to tell her that promises to the dead were foolish, that survival mattered more than sentiment, but he held his tongue. He had made his own promises to the dead, and they had driven him to these mountains. Who was he to judge? "Come up to the cabin," he said instead. "Bring that coffee you mentioned. We will eat, and then I will tell you what you need to know." She gathered a pack from her supplies and followed him through the snow to his cabin. It was a solid structure, built from thick logs chinked with mud and moss, with a stone chimney and a heavy door that could be barred from the inside. Jacob had built it to withstand the worst the mountains could throw at him, and it had served him well. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall with a cooking crane and a collection of well-maintained pots and pans. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs sat near the fire, and a bed frame with a thick mattress stuffed with pine needles occupied one corner. Shelves lined the walls, holding supplies, tools, and a small collection of books. Everything was neat, organized, the home of a man who understood that disorder could be fatal in the wilderness. Sarah stepped inside and sighed with relief as the warmth hit her. Jacob added wood to the fire, building it up, then hung a pot of water to heat. She unpacked a cloth-wrapped bundle, revealing not just coffee but also fresh bread, only a day or two old, a miracle this far from town. "I baked before I left," she explained. "I thought if I was going to ask for help, I should bring something more than just words." Jacob took the bread, surprised by the weight of it, the yeasty smell. He could not remember the last time he had eaten bread that did not come from his own limited baking skills, which were adequate for survival, but nothing more. "This is good," he said simply. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "My mother taught me. She said a woman should always know how to make a proper loaf of bread." They worked in companionable silence, Jacob preparing a stew from dried venison and root vegetables stored in his cellar, while Sarah ground coffee beans in his small hand mill, the rich aroma filling the cabin and making Jacob's mouth water. When the coffee was ready, she poured it into 2 tin cups, and Jacob took his first sip of real coffee in over a year. The taste exploded across his tongue, bitter and rich and complex, warmth spreading through his chest. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring it, and when he opened them, Sarah was watching him with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Good?" she asked. "Better than good," he admitted. "I had forgotten what real coffee tasted like." They ate together at his small table, the stew hot and filling, the bread a luxury, the coffee a revelation. Jacob found himself talking more than he had in months, explaining the basics of winter survival, how to bank a fire so it would last through the night, the importance of keeping multiple sources of tinder dry, the way to read weather signs in the mountains, the tricks for conserving wood while staying warm. Sarah listened intently, asking intelligent questions, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup for warmth. In the firelight, Jacob could see that exhaustion lined her face, dark circles under her eyes, speaking of sleepless nights and recent grief. But there was strength there, too, a core of determination that reminded him of the steel his father had forged in their blacksmith shop back in Ohio, before the war, before everything fell apart. "You should sleep," he said finally, when the fire had burned down to coals and the cabin had grown warm enough that she had shed her heavy coat. "You look like you have not rested properly in days." "I have not," she admitted. "I was afraid to sleep too deeply, alone in that cabin. Every sound woke me, every creak of wood settling, every gust of wind. I kept thinking something was trying to get in." "Out here, something probably is," Jacob said bluntly. "Bears, wolves, mountain lions, they are all hungry in winter, but they are also wary of fire and human scent. Keep your fire going, bar your door properly, and you should be safe enough." She nodded, but he could see the fear in her eyes. He sighed internally, recognizing that he was about to make his situation even more complicated. "I will come by tomorrow," he heard himself say. "Check your cabin, make sure it is secure, show you how to set up proper defenses. After that, you are on your own." "Thank you," she said quietly. "I know you did not have to help me. I know men like you come to the mountains to be left alone. I'm grateful you are making an exception." "Do not be too grateful yet," Jacob said. "You might not survive the winter even with help. This country does not care about your determination or your promises. It only cares about whether you are strong enough and smart enough to endure." "Then I will have to be both," Sarah said, lifting her chin again in that gesture of stubborn resolve he was beginning to recognize. Jacob showed her to the barn, waiting while she settled into her makeshift camp, then returned to his cabin. He barred the door, banked the fire, and lay down in his bed, but sleep was long in coming. He kept thinking about honey-colored eyes and quiet determination, about the way she had smiled when he praised her bread, about the rawness of recent grief in her voice when she spoke of her brother. He told himself it was just sympathy, that any decent human being would feel moved by her situation. He told himself that helping her was simply the right thing to do, nothing more. He told himself that after tomorrow she would go back to her own homestead, and he would return to his solitary life, and everything would be as it was before. But deep down, in a place he did not want to examine too closely, he knew that something had shifted. The careful isolation he had built around himself had developed a crack, and Sarah Brennan, with her coffee and her courage and her honey-colored eyes, had slipped through. Morning came with the pale light that passed for dawn in February, the sun barely clearing the eastern peaks. Jacob rose, dressed, and started his fire, moving through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. He was frying salt pork when he heard Sarah moving around in the barn, and a few minutes later she knocked on his cabin door. "Come in," he called, and she entered, bringing a gust of cold air and the smell of snow with her. "Good morning," she said, stamping snow from her boots. "I was hoping we could leave early. I would like to get back to my cabin and start working on the things you taught me last night." Jacob nodded, dishing up salt pork and the last of the bread, toasted over the fire. They ate quickly, washing it down with more of that excellent coffee, and then gathered their gear. Jacob loaded a pack with tools and supplies, including extra rope, a good saw, and some dried meat. If he was going to help her secure her cabin, he might as well do it properly. They set out into the cold, Sarah's horse-breaking trail, while Jacob walked alongside, his rifle slung over his shoulder. The sky was clear, a brittle blue that promised bitter cold but no snow, at least for today. The forest closed around them, towering pines heavy with snow, their branches forming a white canopy overhead. The world was silent except for the crunch of their passage and the occasional call of a winter bird. Sarah led the way with confidence, following what Jacob could now see was a reasonably well-established trail between their properties. 3 miles was not far in summer, but in winter, through deep snow, it was a serious journey. Still, she moved well, her breathing steady, her pace sustainable. "You are in better shape than most city people," he observed. She glanced back at him, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I am not most city people. My brother and I spent 2 years preparing for this move. We hiked every weekend, practiced camping, learned everything we could. We thought we were ready." Her expression darkened. "We were not ready enough." "No one is ever ready enough for their first winter in the Rockies," Jacob said. "The mountains teach you or they kill you. There's not much middle ground." They walked in silence for a while, and then Sarah spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "What brought you up here? If you do not mind my asking, you do not seem like a man who was born to mountain living." Jacob considered refusing to answer, but something about the quiet morning and her genuine curiosity made him speak. "I was not. I grew up in Ohio, worked in my father's blacksmith shop. Then the war came. I enlisted in 61, fought through the whole damn thing, came home in 65 to find my father dead. My mother remarried and moved to St. Louis, and the shop sold to pay debts. I tried to settle in a few places, but I could not stand it. All those people, all that noise. I kept seeing the war everywhere I looked. So I came west, kept going until I found a place where there were no people, no noise, just mountains and silence. That was 6 years ago. I have not regretted it." "Do you ever get lonely?" Sarah asked quietly. "Every day," Jacob admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "But loneliness is better than the alternative. People leave, people die, people betray you. Mountains just are. They do not change, they do not lie, and they do not leave." "But they do kill," Sarah pointed out. "Honestly," Jacob said, "they kill honestly. I can respect that." Sarah nodded slowly, as if processing this. "My brother said something similar before he died. He said at least he would die under an open sky, pursuing his own dream, not suffocating in a factory or a tenement. He said that had to count for something." "It counts," Jacob said. "It counts for everything." They emerged from the trees into a small clearing, and Jacob saw Sarah's homestead for the first time. It was rougher than his own, clearly built in haste by inexperienced hands, but it was solid enough. A small cabin, maybe 12 feet by 16, with a stone chimney and a single window covered with oiled paper. A lean-to barn, currently empty since Sarah's horse was with them. A small root cellar, its door half buried in snow. And behind the cabin, a fresh grave, marked with a simple wooden cross. Sarah stopped, looking at the grave, her face carefully blank. "I did the best I could," she said. "The ground was frozen, but I managed to dig deep enough. I did not want animals to get to him." Jacob saw the shovel leaning against the cabin wall, its blade bent from the effort of digging in frozen ground. He saw the raw blisters on Sarah's hands, only now beginning to heal. He understood in that moment exactly how strong this woman was, how much determination it had taken to bury her brother alone in the frozen wilderness, and then to keep going, to not give up, to walk 3 miles through snow to ask a stranger for help. "You did well," he said quietly. "He would be proud of you." She nodded, blinking rapidly, then turned toward the cabin. Let me show you the problems I've been having. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Jacob inspected the cabin thoroughly, finding several issues that needed immediate attention. The door did not fit properly, allowing cold air to seep through. The chimney had not been built quite right, creating a backdraft that filled the cabin with smoke. The window covering was too thin, losing precious heat. The roof had a small leak that would become a serious problem if not addressed. He worked methodically, teaching Sarah as he went. He showed her how to pack mud and moss into the gaps around the door, how to adjust the damper in the chimney, how to create a proper insulated window covering using layers of cloth and pine boughs. He repaired the roof leak, reinforced some of the weaker logs in the walls, and helped her reorganize her supplies for maximum efficiency. Sarah watched everything he did with intense focus, asking questions, taking mental notes, occasionally trying her hand at the work herself. She was a fast learner, he noticed, with good instincts and a willingness to get her hands dirty. By midday, when they stopped to eat a cold lunch of dried meat and the last of her bread, the cabin was significantly more secure. "This is amazing," Sarah said, looking around at the improvements. "I cannot believe the difference. It is already warmer in here." "It will be even better once everything settles," Jacob said. "But you need to keep up with maintenance. Check those chinks every few days. Make sure nothing has worked loose. And you need more wood. You do not have nearly enough to make it through to spring." "I know," Sarah said. "I have been trying to split logs, but I'm not very good at it. It takes me 3 times as long as it should, and half the time the axe gets stuck." "I will show you," Jacob said. "It is about technique, not strength, though strength helps." They spent the afternoon by her woodpile, and Jacob demonstrated the proper way to split wood, how to read the grain, where to place the log on the chopping block, how to swing the axe with your whole body, not just your arms. Sarah practiced under his watchful eye, her swings awkward at first, but gradually improving as she got the feel for it. "Better," Jacob said, after she split a log cleanly on the second try. "You are getting it. Remember, let gravity do most of the work. You are just guiding the axe, not forcing it." Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead despite the cold, grinning with satisfaction. "I did it. I actually did it." "You did," Jacob agreed. "Keep practicing. You need to split at least a cord before the next storm hits, probably within the next week or so." Her expression grew concerned. "A week? How can you tell?" "The sky, the wind, the way the animals are behaving," Jacob said. "You learn to read the signs. The squirrels have been frantic the last few days, gathering extra food. The birds are roosting lower in the trees. There is a smell to the air before a big storm, almost metallic. All the signs point to another blizzard coming, probably worse than the last one." "Then I need to work faster," Sarah said, setting up another log with renewed determination. Jacob watched her for a moment, impressed despite himself by her refusal to be overwhelmed. Then, without really thinking about it, he picked up his own axe from his pack and started working on the other side of the wood pile. Sarah looked up in surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Helping you split wood," Jacob said gruffly, not meeting her eyes. "At your pace, you will be here all week. At our combined pace, we can get through it in 2 days." "But you said you would show me how to survive and then leave me alone," Sarah protested, though her tone was hopeful rather than accusatory. "I changed my mind," Jacob said, bringing his axe down with a satisfying crack. "Sue me." Sarah laughed, a bright sound that seemed to startle the snow from the nearby trees, and went back to her own work. They fell into a rhythm, the sound of their axes creating a counterpoint, crack and split, the pile of split wood growing steadily. The afternoon sun, weak but still bright, turned the snow to glitter, and Jacob found himself thinking that he had not felt this content, this purposeful, in a very long time. When the light began to fail, they stopped, both breathing hard from the exertion. They had made serious progress, nearly a third of what Sarah needed, already split and stacked. Jacob's shoulders ached pleasantly, the kind of tiredness that came from honest work. "Thank you," Sarah said, looking at the neat stacks of split wood with obvious satisfaction. "I could not have done this without you." "You could have," Jacob said. "It would have just taken longer. You are stronger than you think." "Maybe," Sarah said. "Or maybe I'm just too stubborn to quit." "Out here, stubbornness is a kind of strength," Jacob said. "Come on, let us get some food in us before I head back." Inside the cabin, now noticeably warmer and more comfortable, Sarah prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans and salt pork with the last of her coffee. They ate by the light of the fire and a single candle, and Jacob found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did, even in his own cabin. There was something deeply peaceful about this moment, about the simple companionship of shared work and shared food. "You know," Sarah said quietly, "when Thomas died, I thought that was it. I thought I would die out here too, that we had made a terrible mistake coming west. But today, splitting wood with you, fixing the cabin, learning how to survive, I felt hope again. I felt like maybe I could actually do this." "You can," Jacob said, and meant it. "You are tougher than most men I knew in the war. You just need to believe in yourself." Sarah met his eyes across the table, and something passed between them, a connection Jacob could not quite name but felt in his chest like a physical thing. He looked away first, uncomfortable with the intensity of it. "I should go," he said, standing abruptly. "I need to get back before full dark." "Will you come back tomorrow?" Sarah asked, also standing. "To help with the rest of the wood?" Jacob knew he should say no, knew he should maintain his distance, stick to his original plan of teaching her the basics and then leaving her alone. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was, "Yes, I will be here at dawn." Sarah smiled, that transforming smile again, and Jacob felt his carefully constructed walls crack a little bit more. He made the journey back to his cabin through the gathering dusk, moving fast, his breath coming in quick plumes. The temperature was dropping rapidly, as it always did after sunset, and by the time he reached home, his beard was thick with frost. He tended to his fire, ate a cold dinner from his supplies, and tried not to think about how empty his cabin felt, how silent, after spending the day in Sarah's company. He had come to the mountains to escape exactly this feeling, this dangerous softening toward another human being. He had learned the hard way that caring about people only led to pain, that attachment was a weakness that could get you killed. But somehow, in less than 2 days, Sarah Brennan had slipped past his defenses, and he had no idea how to rebuild them. Or, more frightening still, if he even wanted to. He returned at dawn the next morning, as promised, his pack loaded with extra supplies, a better saw, some nails and hinges he thought Sarah could use, and a haunch of venison from his stores, which were better stocked than hers. When he arrived, smoke was already rising from her chimney, and he could see her through the window, moving around inside the cabin. She greeted him with obvious pleasure, her face lighting up when she saw what he had brought. "You did not have to do all this," she said, but her gratitude was clear. "I know," Jacob said, "but I did anyway. You need more meat in your diet if you are going to keep up the kind of physical work it takes to survive out here, and these tools will make things easier." They spent another day working side by side, finishing the wood splitting and then moving on to other tasks. Jacob helped her improve her barn, reinforcing the walls and roof so it could withstand heavy snow. He showed her how to set snares for rabbits and squirrels, how to read animal tracks, how to find water even when everything was frozen. Sarah absorbed it all like a sponge, practicing each skill until she had it down. At lunch, sitting on a log outside her cabin in a brief moment of weak sunlight, Sarah asked about his life before the war. Jacob found himself talking about his childhood, about learning the blacksmith trade from his father, about the satisfaction of shaping metal, creating something useful from raw materials. He had not spoken about these things in years, had tried to bury those memories along with everything else from his past, but Sarah's genuine interest drew the stories out of him. "You miss it," she observed. "The blacksmithing?" "Sometimes," Jacob admitted. "There was a purity to it, a simplicity. You could see the results of your work immediately. You knew if you had done a good job or not." "You could do it here," Sarah said. "Build a forge. There must be plenty of people in these mountains who need a blacksmith, and you clearly have other skills too. You could make a living at it." "I did not come here to make a living," Jacob said. "I came here to get away from people." "And yet here you are, helping me," Sarah pointed out gently. "Maybe getting away from people entirely is not what you actually need. Maybe you just needed to get away from the wrong people." Jacob did not have an answer to that, so he changed the subject, and they went back to work. But her words stayed with him, echoing in his mind as they worked through the afternoon. As the sun set and Jacob prepared to leave, Sarah stopped him at the door. I know you value your solitude, she said, and I do not want to impose. But would you consider having dinner here tomorrow night? I want to thank you properly for all your help, and I make a very good roast venison. Jacob should have said no, should have used this as an opportunity to start withdrawing, to begin the process of returning to his solitary life. But instead, he heard himself say, "What time?" Sarah's smile could have warmed the whole cabin. "Sunset. I will have everything ready." Jacob nodded and left, trudging back through the snow to his own cabin, wondering what the hell he was doing. He spent a restless night, and the next day he found himself doing something he had not done in years. He cleaned his cabin thoroughly, trimmed his beard, washed his hair, and even changed into his better shirt, the one without any holes or stains. He told himself he was just being polite, showing proper manners, but he knew he was lying to himself. He arrived at Sarah's cabin just as the sun touched the western peaks, carrying a bottle of whiskey from his carefully hoarded supply. Sarah opened the door, and Jacob actually stopped walking for a moment. She had changed as well, trading her practical work clothes for a dress, simple but clean and well-fitted. Her hair, which he had only ever seen pinned up or hidden under a hood, was down, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She looked beautiful, and the recognition of that fact hit Jacob like a physical blow. "Come in," she said, her smile warm and welcoming. "Everything is almost ready." The cabin smelled amazing, rich with the scent of roasting meat and herbs. Sarah had clearly spent the day preparing, and the results were impressive. The table was set with actual plates, not tin, and there were candles lit, their light soft and warm. Venison roasted on a spit over the fire, its juices dripping and sizzling. There were even biscuits, fresh and hot, a luxury out here in the wilderness. They ate together, the meal delicious and filling, washing it down with coffee and, later, small sips of Jacob's whiskey. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything and nothing. Sarah told stories of her childhood in Philadelphia, of her mother's herb garden, of her father shoeing horses for the wealthy families in the city. Jacob found himself laughing, actually laughing, at her descriptions of the more absurd demands of those wealthy clients. In turn, he told her about the war, carefully edited versions that left out the worst parts, focusing instead on the moments of unexpected humanity. Soldiers from both sides sharing coffee during a brief ceasefire, the way men would sing together at night, the strange friendships that formed in the face of death. "You are a good man, Jacob Tanner," Sarah said quietly, refilling his coffee cup. "You try to hide it, but you are. A good man would not have helped me the way you have." "Or maybe I'm just lonely enough to make bad decisions," Jacob said, but there was no heat in it. "Is this a bad decision?" Sarah asked, meeting his eyes directly. "Being here, having dinner with me?" Jacob looked at her across the table, at the candlelight reflecting in her honey-colored eyes, at the curve of her smile, at the strength and kindness and courage he saw in her face. He thought about the past 3 days, about how alive he had felt, how purposeful, how connected to another human being in a way he had not allowed himself to feel in 6 years. "No," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "It is not a bad decision. It is terrifying, but it is not bad." "Why terrifying?" Sarah asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. "Because I came to these mountains to stop caring about people," Jacob said. "Caring about people means they can hurt you, disappoint you, leave you. I did not want to feel that anymore. But you?" He paused, struggling to find the words. "You make me want to care again, and I do not know if I can survive that." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers warm and strong. "What if you do not have to survive it alone?" she said softly. "What if we survive it together?" Jacob looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her touch spread up his arm and into his chest. He thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea, about how he had sworn to never let anyone close again, about how loving someone in this harsh environment was just setting himself up for loss. But he also thought about the past 3 days, about the simple joy of working alongside someone, of sharing meals and conversation, of feeling connected to another human soul. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted. "I have forgotten how to be with another person, how to let someone in." "Then we will figure it out together," Sarah said. "I'm not asking for promises or declarations, Jacob. I'm just asking for honesty, for a chance, Jacob turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers, and nodded slowly. Honesty. I can do honesty. He took a deep breath. The truth is, from the moment you walked into my clearing carrying that coffee, I have not been able to stop thinking about you. The truth is, I have spent the last 3 days trying to convince myself that I was just being helpful, just being neighborly, when really I was looking for excuses to spend time with you. The truth is, you scare the hell out of me, because I have not cared about anything other than my own survival in 6 years, and suddenly I care very much about yours. Sarah's eyes were bright, and she squeezed his hand gently. The truth is, when I saw you splitting wood that first day, strong and capable and completely in command of your environment, something in me relaxed for the first time since Thomas died. The truth is, I walked 3 miles through snow not just because I needed help, but because I needed to not be alone anymore. The truth is, I have been looking forward to your visits like they were sunlight breaking through clouds. They sat there for a long moment, hands joined across the table, the cabin warm and quiet around them. Then Jacob stood, still holding her hand, and Sarah rose to meet him. He cupped her face gently with his free hand, his calloused thumb brushing across her cheek, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please," she breathed, and Jacob closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, 2 people learning each other. But then Sarah's arms came up around his neck, and Jacob pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of loneliness, finally ended, of connection, finally made. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I'm still terrified," he admitted. "Me too," Sarah said, "but I'm more terrified of sending you away." "Then I will stay," Jacob said. "Not forever, not tonight, but I will stay in your life if you will have me." "I will have you," Sarah said, and kissed him again. Jacob did eventually leave that night, but only after banking her fire and making sure her cabin was secure. He walked back to his own cabin through the cold, dark night, but for the first time in 6 years, the darkness did not feel oppressive. It felt full of possibility. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Jacob would spend his mornings tending to his own homestead, maintaining his cabin and woodpile, checking his trap lines, doing all the work necessary for his own survival. Then, in the afternoons, he would make the trek to Sarah's place, where they would work together on improving her homestead, teaching her new skills and simply enjoying each other's company. The predicted blizzard hit 5 days after that first dinner, a massive storm that buried the mountains under 3 feet of fresh snow. Jacob had moved some of his supplies to Sarah's cabin beforehand, and he stayed there through the worst of it, unable to travel safely. They spent 3 days essentially snowed in together, and it was during those days that their relationship truly deepened. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Sarah told him about her mother, who had died of cholera when Sarah was 16, and how she had kept house for her father and brother after that. She told him about the books she loved to read, the poetry she had memorized, the dreams she had once had of becoming a teacher. Jacob told her about the friends he had lost in the war, about the nightmares that still woke him sometimes, about the guilt he carried for surviving when so many others had not. "It is not your fault that you survived," Sarah said one evening as they sat by the fire, snow pounding against the cabin walls outside. "You survived because you were strong and lucky and meant to live. There is no shame in that." "I know," Jacob said, "but knowing it and believing it are 2 different things." "Then I will believe it for both of us until you can believe it yourself," Sarah said, taking his hand. They kissed often during those snowbound days, learning each other's rhythms, discovering what made the other sigh or smile. But Jacob was careful to maintain proper boundaries, always sleeping on the floor by the fire while Sarah took the bed. His desire for her was strong, growing stronger every day, but his respect for her was stronger. She was alone out here, vulnerable, and he would not take advantage of that, no matter how much they both wanted more. When the storm finally broke, Jacob dug them out, creating a path from Sarah's door to her barn and then breaking trail back to his own cabin. He needed to check on his place, make sure everything had survived the storm. Sarah understood, kissing him goodbye at her door. "Come back tomorrow?" she asked. "I will come back tomorrow," Jacob promised. His cabin had weathered the storm well, but 3 feet of new snow meant hours of work digging out, checking for damage, and breaking trail to his barn and woodpile. He worked until exhaustion claimed him, falling into bed just after sunset. But even exhausted, he dreamed of honey-colored eyes and warm kisses, and woke with a smile on his face. As winter, "You are more than strong enough," Jacob assured her one evening in early March as they sat on the porch of her cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "You are the strongest person I know." "I do not feel strong," Sarah admitted. "I feel like I am constantly on the edge of failure, one mistake away from disaster." "That is just called living in the mountains," Jacob said with a slight smile. "We are all one mistake away from disaster, but you keep going anyway. That is strength." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, and Jacob wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade from the sky, and Jacob realized with a start that he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy, for the first time since before the war. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words coming out before he had consciously decided to say them. Sarah lifted her head, looking at him with wide eyes. "What did you say?" Jacob turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I said I love you. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know this is probably foolish, and I know I said I did not want to care about anyone ever again, but I cannot help it. I love you, Sarah Brennan. You have brought light back into my life, and I love you for it." Tears were running down Sarah's cheeks, but she was smiling, that brilliant, transforming smile. "I love you too," she said. "I have loved you since you agreed to help me that first day, since you spent hours fixing my cabin and teaching me to survive. I have loved you through every moment we have spent together. I love you, Jacob Tanner, and I do not care if it is foolish or too soon, or any of those things. I just know it is true." Jacob kissed her then, pouring everything he felt into that kiss, all the love and fear and hope and desire that had been building in him for weeks. Sarah kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob knew with absolute certainty what he wanted. "Marry me," he said. "I know we have not known each other long, but I know what I feel. I know I want to spend my life with you. Marry me, Sarah. Let us build a life together in these mountains." Sarah laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. There is nothing I want more." They celebrated their engagement with the last of Jacob's whiskey and tender kisses that lasted long into the night. Jacob still maintained his careful boundaries, still slept by the fire. But now there was a ring on Sarah's finger, a simple band he had forged years ago from silver he had traded for, originally meaning it as currency, but now repurposed as a symbol of his love. They decided to wait until spring to make the journey to town to be married properly by a preacher, but in their hearts they considered themselves bound from that moment on. Jacob began spending more time at Sarah's cabin than his own, helping her expand her homestead, discussing plans for their future. They talked about combining their properties, about building a larger cabin that could house a family, about the children they hoped to have someday. As March turned to April, the snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the world beneath. Green shoots pushed through the sodden ground, and the streams and creeks swelled with runoff. The world was coming back to life, and Jacob felt like he was coming back to life with it. He had spent 6 years existing, surviving, but not really living. Sarah had changed that. She had reminded him what it meant to hope, to dream, to plan for a future beyond just making it through the next winter. In mid-April, when the passes were finally clear enough for travel, they made the journey to town together, riding Sarah's horse since it was stronger and better suited for carrying 2 people. The trip took 2 days, camping overnight in the forest, and Jacob treasured every moment of it. They talked and laughed and kissed under the stars, and Jacob thought he had never been more content. The town of Silver Creek was a rough place, like most mining towns in Montana, a collection of hastily built structures that served the miners and ranchers who worked the surrounding area. But it had a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and most importantly, a small church with a circuit preacher who happened to be in town. Reverend Matthews was a weathered man in his 50s who had been riding the circuit for over 20 years. He listened to their story with kind eyes and agreed to marry them that very afternoon. They bought a simple dress for Sarah from the general store, cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar, and Jacob traded some furs for a new shirt and a pair of trousers without patches. They were married in the small church with the store owner and his wife as witnesses, and when Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed his bride with his whole heart. They spent their wedding night in the town's one boarding house, in a small clean room with an actual mattress and sheets that did not smell like pine needles. Jacob made love to his wife for the first time with tenderness and care, discovering her body slowly, worshiping every inch of her skin, bringing her pleasure before seeking his own. Sarah responded with matching passion, her hands exploring the muscles of his back and shoulders, her lips finding his with increasing confidence. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Sarah traced patterns on Jacob's chest. "Oh, I did not know it could be like that," she said softly. "So intimate, so connecting." "Neither did I," Jacob admitted. "I've had women before, but this was different. This was making love, not just coupling. I have never felt anything like it." They made the journey back to the mountains as husband and wife, stopping frequently to kiss and touch, unable to keep their hands off each other now that they had finally given in to their desires. When they reached Sarah's cabin, Jacob carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and they spent the next 3 days barely leaving the bed, except to eat and tend to necessary tasks. Over the following months, they worked to combine their homesteads into one functioning unit. Jacob officially moved into Sarah's cabin, bringing his supplies and tools, and they began construction on a larger cabin that would serve as their permanent home. Jacob's blacksmithing skills proved invaluable, and he set up a small forge where he could do basic metalwork. Word spread among the scattered mountain community that there was a blacksmith available, and people began bringing work to him: horseshoes to be replaced, tools to be repaired, hinges and nails to be made. It brought in some much-needed income and trade goods. Sarah thrived in their partnership. She took over managing the garden and the chickens they had bought in town, and she proved to be an excellent shot with a rifle, bringing down rabbits and occasionally deer to supplement their meat supply. She also began teaching Jacob to read better. His education had been cut short by the war, and she patiently worked with him in the evenings, expanding his vocabulary and introducing him to the books she loved. By late summer, Sarah began to show signs of pregnancy. Her monthly courses stopped, and she developed a slight curve to her belly that grew more pronounced as the weeks passed. Jacob was simultaneously thrilled and terrified. A baby meant joy, meant family, meant a future. But it also meant vulnerability, meant another person to protect, meant the very real possibility of loss in this harsh environment. "We will be all right," Sarah assured him, placing his large hand on her growing belly. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, including out here in the wilderness. I am strong, and you are here to help me. We will be fine." Jacob held her close, feeling the slight swell of their child between them, and prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in any more that she was right. Sarah sailed through her pregnancy with surprising ease, maintaining her strength and energy well into her 7th month. Jacob became almost comically protective, refusing to let her lift anything heavy, insisting she rest frequently, hovering over her like a worried bear. Sarah tolerated his fussing with good humor, teasing him about being an overprotective husband, but secretly pleased by his care. They finished the new cabin just before the first snows of Sarah's second winter in the mountains. It was larger than either of their previous homes, with 2 rooms, a proper loft for storage, and a stone fireplace that Jacob had built with painstaking care. They moved in with a sense of accomplishment and pride, making love in their new bedroom to christen it properly, Sarah's pregnant belly a warm curve between them. In January of 1883, during one of the coldest spells of the winter, Sarah went into labor. Jacob had prepared as best he could, reading the medical texts Sarah had brought from Philadelphia, laying in supplies, making sure the cabin was warm and secure. But nothing could truly prepare him for the reality of watching his wife in pain, her body working to bring their child into the world. Labor lasted 14 hours, the longest 14 hours of Jacob's life. He held Sarah's hands as she pushed, wiped the sweat from her face, murmured encouragement and love, and prayed desperately that both she and the baby would survive. Finally, just before dawn, with a last tremendous effort, Sarah brought their child into the world. "It is a boy," Jacob said, his voice choked with emotion as he held the squalling infant. "We have a son, Sarah, a perfect, healthy son." Sarah laughed weakly, exhausted but radiant, reaching for the baby. Jacob placed their son in her arms, and they marveled together at the tiny, perfect creature they had created. He had Jacob's dark hair and Sarah's delicate features, and 10 perfect fingers and 10 perfect toes. They named him Thomas after Sarah's brother, and Jacob cried openly as he held his son for the first time, all his fears and hopes and love overwhelming him. He had never thought he would have this, a family of his own, a wife and child to love and protect. He had believed that part of life was closed to him forever, but Sarah had changed everything, had given him back his humanity, had shown him that love was worth the risk of loss. Thomas was a healthy baby, thriving despite the harsh winter conditions. Sarah nursed him with ease, and Jacob proved to be a surprisingly adept father, taking to the nighttime feedings and diaper changes with minimal complaint. The new cabin filled with the sounds of baby cries and laughter, and Jacob found that the noise he had once fled from was different when it was the noise of his own family. Spring came again, and with it, new life. Sarah recovered her strength, and little Thomas grew rapidly, becoming a chubby, happy baby who smiled easily and slept reasonably well. Jacob continued his blacksmithing work, and Sarah managed the household and garden with Thomas strapped to her back in a carrier Jacob had fashioned. They were busy, exhausted, and happier than either of them had ever imagined possible. As Thomas grew from baby to toddler, taking his first steps in the summer of 1884, Jacob and Sarah discussed having more children. They both wanted a large family, wanted to fill their cabin with the sound of children's laughter. Sarah became pregnant again in the fall of that year, and their daughter, Anna, was born in the summer of 1885. 2 years later, they welcomed another son, Joseph, and 2 years after that, twin girls they named Margaret and Elizabeth. Their cabin became too small for their growing family, and Jacob built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the main living area. He also improved his forge, turning it into a proper blacksmith shop where he could take on more complex work. His reputation grew, and people came from as far as 50 miles away to have him shoe their horses or repair their equipment. Sarah, meanwhile, became known throughout the mountain community as a skilled healer and midwife. She had learned from her mother and from books, and she had a natural gift for medicine. She helped deliver dozens of babies over the years, and tended to the sick and injured with competence and compassion. Between Jacob's blacksmithing and Sarah's healing, they became pillars of their small mountain community, respected and valued. The years passed in a blur of activity and love. Thomas grew into a strong, capable boy, learning blacksmithing from his father and reading from his mother. Anna was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books to outdoor work but possessing a sharp mind and a kind heart. Joseph was the adventurer, always exploring, always getting into trouble, but with such charm that he was rarely punished. And the twins, Margaret and Elizabeth, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and getting into mischief together. Jacob watched his children grow with a mixture of pride and wonder. He taught his sons to hunt and trap, to read weather signs, to survive in the mountains. He taught his daughters to shoot and ride, refusing to limit them based on their gender. All of his children learned to work hard, to value honesty and compassion, and to appreciate the wild beauty of the mountains that were their home. Sarah remained the center of their family, the heart that kept everything together. She managed their growing household with efficiency and love, making sure everyone was fed and clothed and cared for. She continued to expand her medical knowledge, corresponding with doctors in Helena and ordering new medical texts whenever they went to town. And she and Jacob continued to nurture their relationship, stealing moments alone whenever possible, their love for each other as strong as it had been that day when she brought him coffee and he fell in love right there. As the 19th century drew to a close and the 20th began, the Tanner family continued to thrive. Thomas, now a young man of 18, took over much of the blacksmithing work, proving to be as skilled as his father. Anna, at 16, was preparing to go to Helena to train as a teacher, having saved money from helping her mother with healing work. Joseph, at 14, was already talking about becoming a wilderness guide, and the twins, now 12, were still inseparable, helping their mother with her healing work and showing signs of medical talent themselves. Jacob was now 46 years old, his hair and beard shot through with gray, but still strong and capable. The hard work of mountain living had kept him fit, and his love for his family kept him motivated. He often thought about that cold February day in 1882, when a woman had walked into his clearing carrying coffee and asking for help. He thought about how close he had come to sending her away, to maintaining his isolation, to missing out on everything that had come after. One evening, sitting on the porch of their cabin with Sarah beside him, watching the sun set over the mountains they both loved, Jacob squeezed his wife's hand. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, "staying out here, building this life instead of going back to civilization?" Sarah looked at him with those honey-colored eyes that still made his heart skip a beat after all these years. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "This life has not been easy, but it has been ours. We built it together, from nothing, and look what we have created. 5 beautiful children, a thriving homestead, a place in our community. How could I regret any of that?" "I worried in the beginning that I was being selfish," Jacob admitted. "Asking you to marry me, to stay in these mountains when you could have gone back east, found an easier life." "An easier life is not necessarily a better life," Sarah said. "I love these mountains. I love our children. I love the work we do. And most of all, I love you. I'm Jacob Tanner. I have loved you since the moment you agreed to help me, since you looked at me with those storm-gray eyes and decided I was worth your time. Everything good in my life has come from that moment." Jacob pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Everything good in my life came from you bringing me coffee on a cold February morning," he said. "I was just surviving before that, not really living. You taught me how to live again. You gave me a reason to hope, to dream, to build something lasting. I spent 6 years in these mountains alone, thinking that was what I wanted, what I needed. But I was just hiding, running from pain instead of facing it. You made me face it, made me work through it, and then you loved me anyway, broken pieces and all." "We were both broken," Sarah said softly. "You from the war, me from losing my family. But we put each other back together, piece by piece. That is what love does. It does not erase the scars, but it makes them easier to bear." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, their children's laughter drifting from inside the cabin. Jacob thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, from the horrors of war, to the isolation of the mountains, to the love and family he had found with Sarah. It had not been an easy path, but it had been worth every hardship, every struggle, every moment of doubt. "I would do it all again," he said suddenly. "Every moment, every choice, every hardship, because it all led me to you and to this life we have built together." "As would I," Sarah said, turning to kiss him, her lips still as sweet as they had been on that first kiss nearly 20 years ago. As the years continued to pass, the Tanner family evolved and grew. Anna did indeed become a teacher, returning to the mountains after her training to establish a small school that served the scattered homesteads in the area. She married a young doctor who had come west to establish a practice, and they built a home near Jacob and Sarah, continuing the family tradition of serving their mountain community. Thomas married the daughter of a nearby rancher, a strong, capable woman named Catherine, and they took over the blacksmithing business, expanding it into a full general metalworking shop. They had 4 children of their own, and Thomas proved to be as devoted a father as Jacob had been. Joseph did become a wilderness guide, leading hunting parties and explorers through the mountains. He married late, at 32, to a widow with 2 young children, and he adopted those children as his own, giving them the love and guidance they needed. Margaret became a midwife like her mother, working alongside Sarah, and then eventually taking over most of Sarah's duties as Sarah grew older. Elizabeth became a rancher, buying land with her husband and building one of the most successful cattle operations in the region. Jacob and Sarah lived to see all their children married and settled, lived to welcome 16 grandchildren into the world. They grew old together in the mountains they loved, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing down, but their love for each other never diminishing. They remained partners in every sense of the word, working together, supporting each other, facing each challenge as a team. In the spring of 1922, when Jacob was 68 and Sarah was 65, Sarah fell ill with pneumonia, the same disease that had taken her brother 40 years earlier. Jacob nursed her with desperate devotion, using every trick of medicine and healing he had learned over their decades together. But the pneumonia was severe, and Sarah's body, worn down by years of hard living and childbearing, could not fight it off. She died on a warm May morning, holding Jacob's hand, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Her last words were, "I love you, Jacob Tanner. Thank you for giving me such a beautiful life." Jacob held her as she took her last breath, his tears falling on her face, his heart breaking in a way he had not thought possible. They buried her in a spot she had chosen years earlier, on a hillside overlooking their homestead, with a view of the mountains she had loved. Jacob carved her headstone himself, working with painstaking care to create something worthy of the woman who had been his whole world for 40 years. Sarah Brennan Tanner, the stone read, beloved wife, mother, healer. She brought light to the mountains and love to a lonely heart, 1857 to 1922. Jacob lived for 3 more years after Sarah's death, cared for by his children, spending his days sitting on the porch of the cabin they had built together, looking out at the mountains and remembering. He told stories of Sarah to his grandchildren, making sure they knew what an extraordinary woman she had been. He taught them her recipes, her healing techniques, her philosophy of life. On a cold February morning in 1925, 43 years almost to the day after he had first met Sarah, Jacob Tanner died peacefully in his sleep. He was buried next to Sarah on that hillside, and his children carved his headstone to match hers. Jacob Tanner, it read, beloved husband, father, blacksmith. He found love in the wilderness and built a legacy that will endure. 1854 to 1925. The Tanner family continued to thrive in the Montana mountains for generations after Jacob and Sarah were gone. Their descendants carried on their traditions, their values, and their love for the wild places they called home. The story of how Jacob and Sarah met, of how a woman brought coffee to a lonely mountain man and changed both their lives forever, was told and retold, becoming family legend, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that taking a chance on connection, on opening your heart despite fear and pain, could lead to the most beautiful life imaginable. The cabin they built together still stood for over a century, maintained by their descendants as a memorial and a reminder of where the family began. And on that hillside, their headstones stood side by side, overlooking the mountains they had loved, marking the resting place of 2 people who had found each other in the wilderness and built something extraordinary from that meeting. Their story became more than just family legend. It was told in the town of Silver Creek, passed down through generations of mountain people as an example of what was possible when you had courage, determination, and love. It was a story about second chances, about healing from past wounds, about the power of human connection to transform lives. Jacob had come to the mountains broken, seeking solitude and isolation, trying to escape the pain of his past. Sarah had come to the mountains seeking a new life, only to face tragedy and near overwhelming challenges. Alone, they might have failed, might have become just another cautionary tale about the dangers of wilderness living. But together, they had not just survived, but thrived, building a life of meaning and purpose, raising children who went on to do the same. The simple act of Sarah walking to Jacob's homestead with coffee on that cold February day in 1882 had rippled outward, affecting not just their lives but the lives of everyone they touched. Their children and grandchildren, their patients and customers, the entire mountain community benefited from their decision to open their hearts to each other, to take a chance on love, despite all the reasons not to. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the transformative power of love, and to the beauty that could be found in the wild places of the world when you had someone to share them with. Jacob had fallen in love right there, in that moment when Sarah offered him coffee and kindness. And that love had sustained him through 40 years of marriage, through the joys and sorrows of raising a family, through the daily challenges of mountain living, and ultimately, through the grief of losing the woman who had been his whole world. The mountains that Jacob had once fled to for isolation became, through Sarah's love, a place of connection and community. The cabin that had been a hermit's refuge became a family home filled with laughter and love. The man who had sworn off caring about people became a devoted husband, a loving father, and a pillar of his community, all because a woman brought him coffee on a cold morning and he chose to let her in. In the end, that is what the story of Jacob and Sarah Tanner was really about: the choice to love, the courage to be vulnerable, the willingness to let someone past your defenses and into your heart. It was a choice that neither of them regretted, not for a single moment of their 40 years together. And it was a choice that created a legacy that endured long after they were gone, a legacy of love, family, and the enduring power of human connection in even the wildest and most isolated places.